I'll be honest with you. My son looked me straight in the eye, grinned and said loud enough for everyone at the barbecue to hear, "Dad, you'll never be half the man Richard is." For a second, all I could hear was the hiss of burgers dripping grease onto the grill. Nobody laughed. Nobody rushed to smooth it over. Richard lowered the beer bottle he'd been holding and stared at the grass like he'd suddenly found it fascinating. My ex-wife, Melissa, pressed her lips together, but didn't say a word. Claire looked from Ethan to me with a confused little smile, waiting for someone to explain what was supposed to be funny. I stood there holding a paper plate with a hamburger I'd barely touched. Then I smiled. "Good." Ethan frowned. "What?" I set the plate on the patio table and reached for my truck keys. "If Richard's the better man," I said evenly, "then let him pay from now on." Claire blinked. "What do you mean?" "You'll find out." I walked to my old Ford F-150 without another word. Nobody followed me. Rain started before I reached Interstate 70. It wasn't much at first, just enough to smear the windshield and make the wipers squeak across the glass. My left knee throbbed every time I moved from the gas pedal to the brake. The orthopedic doctor called it normal wear for a man who'd spent nearly 40 years climbing attic ladders, crawling through crawl spaces, and hauling furnaces that weighed more than some refrigerators. I called it earning a living. Sports radio filled the cab, but I wasn't listening. My mind had already wandered somewhere else. Back to a February morning almost 20 years earlier. The kind of Ohio winter that froze your eyelashes. I'd spent 14 hours replacing rooftop heating units at a school outside Newark. By the time I drove toward Columbus, every decent restaurant had closed. Dinner was a stale turkey sandwich from a gas station. When I finally got home, Ethan had already fallen asleep. His Little League trophy sat on the kitchen counter. Melissa told me he'd hit a triple. "I saved you some cake," she'd said. I remember staring at that slice longer than I should have. I'd missed another game, not because I wanted to, because overtime paid the mortgage. Another memory followed before I could stop it. 8 years ago, the divorce papers were still sitting on my dining room table. Ethan had been 25, old enough to understand that marriages sometimes failed, young enough to think it was somebody's fault. He came over one evening to pick up a few boxes. Before he left, I stopped him on the porch. "I don't care what happens between your mom and me," I told him. "I'll always have your back." He nodded without saying much. At the time, I believed promises like that were simple. You make them. You keep them. Nobody warns you that someday keeping them might cost you your dignity. By the time I pulled into downtown Columbus, the rain had turned steady. Most people would have gone home after a day like that. Instead, I parked outside my attorney's office. The lights were still on. Linda Parker had handled my divorce years earlier. Then she'd helped me create something I hoped Ethan would never need to think about. The Sullivan Family Trust. She looked up as I stepped inside. "Jack, you still working?" She smiled. Apparently. Her assistant had already gone home. The office was quiet except for the air conditioner humming overhead. She noticed my expression almost immediately. "What happened?" I sat down carefully, easing pressure off my knee. "My son finally told me the truth." She waited. She'd been practicing law too long to interrupt silence. Finally, I said, "Terminate every automatic payment." Her face didn't change. She simply folded her hands together. "Everything," I nodded. "The mortgage assistance." She made a note. "The daycare." Another note. "Property taxes, medical reimbursements, home repairs." Her pen stopped moving. She looked over the top of her glasses. "Are you certain?" I stared through the office window toward High Street. People hurried beneath umbrellas. A city bus hissed to a stop. Life kept moving. Funny how it always does, even when yours feels like it's standing still. I've spent 4 years making sure Ethan never had to worry about unexpected bills. Linda nodded. "I know. He doesn't know they're coming from me." "I know. He thinks somebody else is carrying him." Another quiet nod. Then she asked the hardest question. "Is this about proving a point?" I thought about answering too quickly. Instead, I took a long breath. "No." She waited. "I'm done protecting someone from consequences he insists don't exist." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she slid one document across the desk. "If you sign this today, the scheduled trust disbursements stop immediately. A few have already cleared for this month." "How long?" "The first missed payment should become noticeable in about 10 days. 10 days. 4 years of invisible support, ending in 10 days. I signed my name. My handwriting looked older than I remembered. Linda gathered the paperwork into a folder but didn't file it right away. "I've known you a long time, Jack." "I know." "I don't think you're angry." "I'm not." "So what are you—" I considered the question. "Tired." She gave a small, understanding smile. "I believe you." The rain had stopped when I walked back outside. The sidewalks glistened beneath the streetlights. I stood beside my truck for a moment before climbing in. For the first time in years, I wondered what my weekends might look like if I wasn't quietly solving somebody else's emergencies. Maybe I'd finally finish repairing the porch. Maybe I'd go fishing with Tom again. Maybe I'd sit on my own back deck without waiting for my phone to ring because someone's water heater had failed or the daycare tuition was due. The thought felt strangely unfamiliar, almost selfish, almost peaceful. When I reached home, the porch steps creaked beneath my boots. Inside the house was exactly as I'd left it. One recliner, one coffee mug drying beside the sink, one baseball game replaying softly on television. I poured myself a cup of coffee, even though it was nearly 9 at night. Old habits. I carried it onto the porch and listened to the crickets. Across town, Ethan was probably finishing dessert with everyone else. Maybe they were still talking about Richard. Maybe they'd already forgotten what I'd said. I wasn't sure which possibility hurt more. I looked out into the darkness and reminded myself of something I'd spent years teaching young technicians who worked for me. A furnace doesn't fail the day it stops blowing warm air. It fails long before that. You just don't notice until the house gets cold. 10 days from now, the first payment would quietly disappear. Nobody would notice. Not yet. The first week after I signed those papers was almost disappointingly quiet. Nothing happened. Or at least nothing that anybody could see. I still woke up at 6 every morning. I still carried my coffee out to the porch before the neighborhood came alive. Mrs. Donnelly across the street still walked her golden retriever at exactly 6:30, waving the same way she had for years. If you'd looked at my life from the outside, you would have thought nothing had changed. But somewhere deep inside a stack of electronic transactions, one automatic payment simply never arrived. No phone calls, no angry texts, no emergencies, just silence. For nearly 10 days. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday afternoon. I was replacing a loose railing on my porch when my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. For a second, I considered letting it ring. Instead, I answered. Hey, hi, Dad. His voice sounded normal. Too normal. You busy? Depends. I just wondered if you've seen Claire. I frowned. Why, she's running errands. Then she's probably running errands. A nervous laugh. Yeah. He hesitated. You ever have problems with daycare billing? I kept driving the screw into the railing. What kind of problems? They emailed Claire saying this month's tuition hasn't been paid. They make mistakes sometimes. That's what I figured. You call them, Claire's handling it. I'm sure it'll get sorted out. Another pause. Yeah, probably. We hung up less than a minute later. He never asked me for money. He never mentioned the trust, because he still didn't know it existed. 3 days later, another payment quietly failed to arrive. This time it was larger. The supplemental mortgage payment. That Friday afternoon, Claire opened the mailbox. Ethan, he looked up from his laptop. What? Did you miss a mortgage payment? He frowned. No, she held up the envelope. It says we're short. He stood and took the notice. I've got automatic withdrawals. So why would they send this? I don't know. Claire watched him read the letter twice. You should call the bank. I will. Instead, he called Richard. I didn't hear that conversation until much later. Claire told me about it months afterward. She said Ethan put the phone on speaker while she made dinner. Richard answered after 3 rings. Hey, buddy. Richard, we got some kind of mortgage notice. Oh, they're saying we're behind. You know anything about that? A short silence. Then Richard chuckled. Probably some paperwork delay. You sure? Absolutely. I'll make a few calls. I've got a commercial closing Thursday. So, give me a couple days. Ethan relaxed almost immediately. Okay, Claire didn't. Ohio summers have a way of sneaking up on you. 1 week you're opening windows at night. The next you're sweating before breakfast. 3 weeks after the barbecue, Columbus hit 94 degrees. Humidity thick enough to chew. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Claire. I almost didn't answer. Not because I was angry. Because I already knew why she was calling. Hi, Claire. I'm sorry to bother you. You never bother me. She sounded exhausted. Our air conditioner stopped. I looked across my garage at the shelves where I'd kept HVAC tools for decades. Even retired, I still had enough equipment to diagnose almost anything. Normally, I'd already be grabbing my tool bag. When did it quit? This morning. The fan running? Yes. Cold air. No, she sighed. It's 86 degrees inside. I closed my eyes. Little Lily hated the heat. I remembered that. Did you call anyone? One company came already. And they quoted $2,480. I knew that number wasn't outrageous. Compressors weren't cheap anymore. Still, it wasn't money they had sitting around. Claire lowered her voice. Ethan said maybe you could look at it. There it was. The request I'd been expecting. I rested one hand on my workbench. I'm retired. I know. I'm sorry. She sounded embarrassed. I just thought, I understand. She waited. So did I. Finally, she whispered, okay. The call ended gently. No argument. No guilt. But after I set the phone down, I stood there staring at my toolbox for a long time. Every instinct I'd built over 40 years told me to get in my truck, fix the unit, take care of my family. Instead, I walked into the kitchen and poured another cup of coffee. It tasted bitter. That weekend, I drove to Grove City for physical therapy. The therapist stretched my knee until it burned. You've been overcompensating for years, she said. I've been told that. Your body keeps score. Funny. So do families. After therapy, I met my old Army buddy Tom at Hoover Reservoir. We hadn't fished together in almost 2 years. Mostly because every weekend I'd been helping Ethan with something. Fence repairs, water heaters, garage doors. There was always something. Tom handed me a tackle box. Took you long enough. I've been busy. You retired almost 3 years ago. I know. He looked at me. No. He said it gently. You've been available. That landed harder than he probably intended. We spent 6 quiet hours on the lake. Caught almost nothing. Didn't matter. It was the most relaxed I'd felt in years. The following Wednesday, I volunteered with Habitat for Humanity, mostly repairing porches and wheelchair ramps for older veterans. Nobody there cared what I'd done for my own family. Nobody expected free labor because we shared a last name. One of the volunteers asked if I'd recently retired. I smiled. I'm learning how. That night, my phone stayed silent. No emergency plumbing. No broken furnace. No request to babysit because somebody had forgotten to arrange childcare. I should have slept well. Instead, I lay awake wondering about Lily. Had they fixed the air conditioner? Was she sleeping in the heat? Had I gone too far? I wasn't worried about Ethan. He was 33 years old. He could solve problems. It was my granddaughter who haunted me. Around midnight, I almost picked up the phone. Almost called. Almost offered to come over. Almost undid everything. Instead, I remembered the look on Ethan's face at the barbecue. You'll never be half the man Richard is. The words still stung. Not because they questioned my pride. Because they erased 4 decades of showing up. I set the phone back on the nightstand. Sometimes love isn't rescuing someone. Sometimes love is trusting they'll learn to stand on their own, even when it hurts you more than it hurts them. Across town, Claire sat at the kitchen table surrounded by unopened envelopes. Daycare, mortgage, utility bills, the repair estimate for the air conditioner. She arranged them into neat piles. Something about the numbers bothered her. None of it made sense anymore. She looked across the table at Ethan. He was rubbing his forehead, quiet, frustrated. Finally, she asked the question neither of them had ever thought to ask before. Ethan. He looked up. When things went wrong before, what do you mean? The roof. He shrugged. Yeah. The hospital after Lily was born? Okay. The plumbing. The taxes. The daycare. She folded her hands. Who actually paid for all those things? He opened his mouth, then stopped. For the first time in years, he realized he honestly didn't know. Claire was the kind of woman who saved receipts, not in some obsessive way. She wasn't one of those people with color-coded binders for every light bulb she ever bought. But she kept grocery totals in a small notebook by the microwave. She knew when the electric bill usually hit. She could tell you how much Lily's school shoes cost without looking it up. That was part of why I liked her from the beginning. Claire didn't spend money to impress people. Ethan had started doing that somewhere along the way. The next morning after their conversation at the kitchen table, Claire called the daycare before school. She stood in the hallway outside her second-grade classroom, one hand over her other ear, while children shouted somewhere near the cafeteria. Hi, this is Claire Sullivan, Lily Sullivan's mom. She listened. Yes, we got the notice. I'm just trying to understand because I thought tuition was drafted automatically. A pause. Then her eyebrows pulled together. Supplemental payment. Another pause. No, I'm not upset. I just don't recognize that name. She pulled a pen from the cup beside the classroom phone and wrote it on the back of a spelling worksheet. Sullivan Family Trust. That was the first time she saw it. Not the first time it had paid for something. Just the first time anyone had bothered to say the name out loud. That same afternoon, Ethan called Richard again. I know that because Claire told me later. She remembered every word because she was standing in the laundry room, folding Lily's tiny t-shirts while the dryer shook against the wall. Hey, Richard, Ethan said, trying to sound casual. Did you ever hear back about that mortgage thing? Richard sounded relaxed as usual. I'm still looking into it. It's been over a week. These institutions move slow. Claire's asking questions. That changed the air. Even over speakerphone, Claire could hear Richard hesitate. What kind of questions? About payments. Well, bills come from everywhere these days. She said daycare mentioned something called Sullivan Family Trust. The dryer buzzed. Claire didn't move. Richard cleared his throat. That sounds like one of your father's arrangements. My father, maybe, I don't know. Jack was always particular about paperwork. Ethan went quiet. You knew about this. I said maybe. But you've always handled the tax stuff. I helped organize it, that's different. Claire folded the same little yellow shirt 3 times. Ethan lowered his voice. Richard, have you been paying these bills or not? There was a long pause. Then Richard gave one of those half-laughs polished people use when they don't want to answer plainly. Ethan, I have helped this family in plenty of ways. That's not what I asked. I've got a meeting. The line went dead. By Thursday, Claire had the kitchen table covered. Mortgage statements, daycare invoices, old medical bills, insurance paperwork, property tax envelopes. She worked through them after Lily went to bed, her reading glasses low on her nose, a cup of cold tea beside her elbow. Ethan paced behind her. This is ridiculous, he said. Then sit down and help me. I don't even know what you're looking for. That's the problem. He stopped near the sink. Claire. She didn't look up. What? Why does this feel like you're accusing me? She set down the statement in her hand. I'm not accusing you. I'm asking you to look at our own finances like an adult. That one hit him. He stared at her. I work 60 hours a week. I know. I provide for this family. I know you work hard. Then why are you acting like I'm some spoiled kid? Claire took off her glasses. Because last month you told your father he'd never be half the man Richard is. And this month every bill we thought was handled suddenly isn't handled. Ethan looked away first. Outside, the air conditioner still hadn't been replaced. A box fan hummed in the hallway, pushing warm air from one room to another. Claire picked up another statement. Look. She turned it toward him. On the mortgage ledger, every month showed their regular withdrawal. Then another smaller amount. Same date. Same label. Sullivan Family Trust. Ethan stepped closer. That can't be Dad. Why not? Because he would have said something. Would he? That shut him up. Because even Ethan knew the answer. Meanwhile, my life got quieter. Not happier exactly. Quieter. I fixed 2 more boards on the porch. I finally replaced the rusted mailbox post I'd been meaning to deal with since spring. On Saturday morning, I drove to a small diner near Westerville, where Tom liked the biscuits and gravy, even though his doctor had warned him about both. He slid into the booth across from me and studied my face. You look better. I look the same. No, you look like a man who stopped carrying a refrigerator up the stairs. I laughed despite myself. The waitress poured coffee. Tom waited until she left. Your boy called once, and he asked if I stopped helping somehow. What did you say? I stirred my coffee slowly. I haven't answered yet. Tom leaned back. Jack. I know. You don't owe him a courtroom presentation. No, but you owe yourself the truth. I looked out the window at cars passing along State Street. The truth won't make me feel better. No, he said. But lies keep charging interest. That was Tom. He could make a fishing trip sound like a sermon if you let him. That evening, Ethan finally texted me. No apology. No explanation. Just one sentence. Did you stop helping somehow? I sat in my recliner with the baseball game muted and stared at the screen until it dimmed. I typed, I helped because I loved you. Deleted it. Typed, you should ask Richard. Deleted that too. Then, I didn't stop being your father. I stopped being your bank. I stared at that one longest. Too sharp. Too satisfying. Too close to what I wanted to say, which meant it probably wasn't what I should say. Finally, I wrote, I'm sure Richard has it covered. I hit send before I could change my mind. The reply came almost immediately. What does that mean? I didn't answer. I set the phone face down on the side table and turned the sound back on. The Reds were losing. Somehow that felt about right. 2 days later, Claire requested copies of older mortgage records. The bank employee asked how far back. 4 years, Claire said. Ethan stood beside her in the branch lobby, shifting his weight like a man waiting outside the principal's office. 4 years, he whispered. Yes. Claire, this is a lot. She looked at him calmly. So are the bills. They waited 20 minutes in stiff chairs under a television playing muted news. Lily was with a neighbor. Ethan kept checking his phone. Claire kept her hands folded around her purse strap. When the banker finally came back, she handed Claire a printed packet. There are recurring supplemental payments from an external account. Claire's mouth went dry. Can you tell us whose account? The banker shook her head. Not directly, but the payment memo appears on several records. Claire turned the first page. There it was again. Sullivan Family Trust. Ethan took the packet from her and flipped through the pages faster and faster. Every month. Every year. Quiet, steady, and visible. His face changed as he read. At first disbelief. Then anger. Then something smaller. Something closer to shame. Claire's voice softened. Ethan. He didn't answer. He just stared at the name printed again and again, like the paper had opened a door he wasn't ready to walk through. And for the first time since that barbecue, he understood this wasn't a billing mistake. It was a mirror. Claire came to my house on a Friday afternoon without calling first. I was on the porch when she pulled into the driveway, kneeling beside the steps with a pry bar in one hand and a box of deck screws open beside my knee. The July heat had finally eased a little, but the air still felt heavy. A cicada buzzed from the maple tree near the curb, loud enough to drown out the traffic 2 streets over. She sat in her car for a moment after turning off the engine. I could see her through the windshield, both hands on the wheel, head lowered. That was when I knew. She wasn't there to borrow money. She was there because the truth had started knocking, and nobody inside her house wanted to answer the door. I wiped my hands on a rag and stood slowly. My knee brace showed beneath the torn denim at my left leg. I usually kept it hidden, not out of pride exactly, but because people look at a brace and start talking to you like you're already halfway gone. Claire stepped out holding a folder against her chest. Hi, Jack. Hi, sweetheart. Her mouth trembled a little when I said that. I'm sorry for just showing up. You don't need an appointment to come here. She glanced at the porch boards. I can come back. If you do, these steps will still be ugly. A small laugh slipped out of her. Not much, just enough to break the stiffness between us. I opened the front door. Come inside, it's cooler. My house wasn't fancy. It never had been. A brown recliner near the window, a bookshelf full of manuals, old baseball books, and framed pictures of Ethan growing up. One photo of Lily at 2 years old sat on the mantel holding a melting popsicle and grinning like she'd discovered fire. Claire noticed it right away. She walked over and touched the edge of the frame. She still makes that face. I know. You do. I smiled. Claire, I may not talk much, but I do pay attention. That one landed between us heavier than I meant it to. She lowered her eyes. I think we've missed a lot. I nodded toward the kitchen table. Sit down. She did. I poured 2 glasses of iced tea, mostly to give my hands something ordinary to do. When I set hers down, she still had both palms pressed flat against the folder she'd brought. Did Ethan come with you? I asked. No. Does he know you're here? She shook her head. He thinks I'm at Target. That's a dangerous place to be with a teacher's paycheck. She smiled faintly, then took a breath. Jack, I need to ask you something. I sat across from her. All right. She opened her folder and pulled out photocopies from the bank. The label was circled in blue pen. Sullivan Family Trust. Is this you? For years I'd imagined that question coming with anger. Or accusation. Or maybe Ethan slamming papers onto my table, demanding to know why I had made him look foolish. But Claire asked quietly, like someone afraid the answer might hurt more than the confusion. Yes, I said. She stared at me. All of it? Most of it? What does most mean? I stood and went to the small cabinet beside my desk. Second drawer, left side. A man can hide the truth from people, but he usually still knows exactly where he put it. I took out a thin manila folder and a black USB drive. When I returned to the table, Claire's face had gone pale. I didn't bring this out to shame anybody, I said. Then why did you keep it? Because someday I thought I might need to prove I wasn't crazy. She looked down. I slid the folder toward her. Inside were copies of payments, mortgage supplements, daycare tuition, property taxes, emergency plumbing after the downstairs bathroom flooded, a roof repair from the spring storm 2 years back, several invoices from my old company all marked the same way, paid internal account. Claire turned each page slowly. She didn't cry at first. That came later. At first she just looked stunned, like her mind was refusing to let the numbers become real. This was $4,000, she whispered. The roof. Ethan said Richard helped with that. I know. Her eyes lifted. You knew he said that, I suspected. Why didn't you correct him? I looked toward the window. Outside, a squirrel ran along the fence rail. At first because it didn't matter. The roof got fixed. Lily stayed dry. That was enough. And later, I rubbed my thumb along a nick in the table. Later, I guess I got used to being invisible. Claire pressed her lips together. Then she turned another page. The color drained from her face. Oh my God, I didn't have to look. I knew which one it was. Riverside Methodist Hospital. Emergency C-section. Complications. 2 nights in recovery. A bill that had scared Ethan so badly he stopped answering calls from unknown numbers. Claire put one hand over her mouth. You paid this. The trust paid it. Jack. I looked at her then. I wasn't paying because I wanted credit. I was paying because I loved my granddaughter. Her shoulders folded inward. For a moment she looked younger than 31, like one of her own students trying not to cry in front of the class. I thanked Richard, she said. Her voice broke on his name. I made him dinner. I hugged him. I told him I didn't know what we'd do without him. I didn't answer. There are some humiliations a person has to set down themselves. Claire wiped her cheek hard. Did Melissa know? No. Did Richard? He knew enough not to ask too many questions. She gave a bitter little laugh. That sounds like him. I pushed the USB drive closer. Digital copies are on there. Payment history, attorney letters, receipts, nothing edited, nothing dramatic. She stared at it. Why are you giving this to me? Because you asked the right question. She looked confused. What question? You asked who actually paid, not who looked generous. That was when she finally cried. Not loudly. No scene. Just tears sliding down her face while she sat at my kitchen table with 4 years of my quiet life spread out between us. I wanted to comfort her. I also knew I had to let her feel it. So I stayed still. That evening, Ethan called his accountant. He did it from the driver's seat of his SUV in the grocery store parking lot because Claire had come home with the USB drive and placed it on the counter without saying a word. At first, he didn't believe her. Then he didn't believe the documents. Then he said, I need to talk to Mark. Mark Allen had handled their taxes for years. Recommended by Richard, naturally. Ethan called him 3 times before Mark picked up. I never heard the call directly, but Ethan told me later. His voice shook when he repeated it. Mark, he said, I need to know what the Sullivan Family Trust is. There was a pause. Then Mark sighed. That's your father's trust. My father's? Yes. How long has it been paying things for us? Another pause. Ethan, you really need to ask your father. How long? Several years. Ethan sat there gripping the steering wheel. People walked past with carts full of groceries. A teenage employee gathered stray carts near the entrance. The world kept doing ordinary things while his version of it came apart. Did Richard know? Mark hesitated too long. That was answer enough. Ethan ended the call. For a while, he just sat in the dimming light with both hands on the wheel. Then he bent forward until his forehead touched the top of it. And for the first time in years, my son cried alone, where nobody could thank the wrong man for it. The invitation for Lily's 5th birthday arrived 3 days later. Claire texted me instead of calling. Lily would really like you to come. 3 o'clock Saturday. Just family. Nothing more. No apology. No explanation. Just an invitation. I looked at the message for a long time before replying. I'll be there. Saturday afternoon couldn't have been more Ohio if it tried. Blue sky. A few lazy clouds. Kids riding bicycles down the street. Someone 2 houses over mowing a lawn that probably didn't need mowing. I parked my old F-150 at the curb and sat there for a moment with the engine off. For years, I'd walked into family gatherings wondering what needed fixing. A leaking faucet. A broken fence. Some unexpected bill? This was the first time I'd shown up with nothing to repair. Just a birthday present wrapped in yellow paper. Lily spotted me through the front window before I reached the porch. Grandpa! She threw the front door open and ran into my arms. Careful with my knee. Always careful. She'd somehow learned that without anyone teaching her. You came. I wouldn't miss your birthday. She leaned close and whispered, Mom made chocolate cake. Then I'm definitely glad I came. She giggled and pulled me inside. The house looked different. Not physically, emotionally. The television was off. No music played. Conversation stayed low. Melissa greeted me first. Hi, Jack. Hi. She looked like she wanted to say something else. Instead, she stepped aside. Richard stood near the kitchen island wearing a pressed golf shirt and holding a glass of iced tea. He smiled politely. Jack. Richard. Neither of us offered a handshake. Neither of us needed one. Ethan appeared from the hallway carrying a tray of paper plates. Our eyes met. For the first time in months, he looked away first. The party itself felt surprisingly normal. Lily opened presents. The grandchildren from Claire's sister chased balloons around the backyard. People talked about baseball rising grocery prices and whether Ohio State would finally have another championship season. For almost an hour, nobody mentioned money. I almost believed they wouldn't. Then Richard stood and lightly tapped his glass with a spoon. If I could have everyone's attention, Conversations faded. He smiled the way successful brokers always seem to smile. Comfortable. Confident. I just wanted to say how proud I am of this family. Melissa smiled at him. Claire didn't. Richard continued. We've all made sacrifices over the years. He lifted his glass. And that's what family does. I saw Claire slowly stand from her chair. She walked into the living room without interrupting him. Nobody noticed except me. Richard kept talking. When people love each other, the television turned on behind him. Every head turned. Claire stood beside it holding her laptop. She plugged in one cable, then another. The screen changed. No photos, no birthday slideshow. Just a scanned document. Mortgage statement. Supplemental payment received. Sullivan Family Trust. Silence spread through the room. Claire clicked again. Hospital invoice. Paid in full. Sullivan Family Trust. Another click. Property tax payment. Another. Emergency plumbing. Another. Roof replacement. Another. HVAC repair. Every receipt. Every invoice. Every payment. 4 years. One after another. Nobody spoke. The only sound came from the ceiling fan. Richard slowly lowered his glass. Melissa stared at the television. What? She whispered. Claire finally looked at everyone. I've spent 3 days verifying every document. She clicked once more. The final page appeared. Attorney correspondence. Termination of trust payments. Dated. The Monday after the barbecue. Exactly 2 days after Ethan told his father he wasn't half the man Richard was. The room became painfully still. Richard cleared his throat. I think... He glanced toward the television. There's been some misunderstanding. Claire looked directly at him. Then explain it. I never claimed these were my payments. No. Her voice stayed calm. You never corrected anyone either. Richard shifted his weight. I assumed everybody understood. Ethan finally spoke. I didn't. Neither did Melissa. Richard spread his hands. I introduced you to the accountant. You handled our paperwork, Ethan replied. You always said everything was under control. It usually was, but not because of you. Richard didn't answer. Because there wasn't an answer that made him look better. Melissa slowly sat down. She looked 20 years older than when I'd arrived. I thanked you. She was looking at Richard. I thanked you every Christmas. Richard opened his mouth, closed it again. Melissa turned toward me. Jack. Her voice cracked. I thought. I know. No. Tears filled her eyes. I never asked. She covered her mouth. I never once asked where any of it came from. I shook my head gently. It's over. No. She wiped her face. It's not. Then Ethan stood. I'd seen him nervous before. Job interviews. His wedding. The day Lily was born. I'd never seen him look this broken. He walked across the room until we were only a few feet apart. Everyone else disappeared. He looked like the little boy who used to wait by the front window for my truck headlights after late jobs. I'm sorry. Barely louder than a whisper. I didn't lose my father that day. His eyes filled. I threw him away. Nobody moved. I took a slow breath. I never stopped loving you. He nodded, crying openly now. I know. I just stopped paying to be disrespected. His shoulders shook. I deserve that. No. I placed one hand on his shoulder. You deserve the chance to become the man I always hoped you'd be. He wrapped both arms around me. Not quickly, not dramatically. Just like a son who'd spent weeks carrying something too heavy to keep holding. Across the room, Claire quietly wiped away tears. Melissa looked down at her hands. Lily didn't understand everything that had happened. She only smiled because Grandpa and Daddy were hugging again. Sometimes, children recognize healing before adults do. Richard picked up his car keys from the kitchen counter. Nobody stopped him. Nobody argued. Nobody asked him to stay. He paused at the front door, looked back once, then quietly walked outside. No slammed door. No speech. Just the sound of his car starting a minute later. By the time the engine faded down the street, everyone in the house understood that respect had finally found its way back home. 6 months passed faster than I expected. The first Saturday in January, I walked onto my porch with a steaming mug of coffee, just like I had every morning for years. The porch still creaked beneath my boots. The old wind chime Melissa had bought decades ago still rattled whenever a cold breeze came through. My left knee still complained before the weather changed. Some things I've learned never really leave you. And honestly, I'm grateful they don't. They remind me where I've been. The biggest difference wasn't my house. It wasn't my retirement. It wasn't even my bank account. It was the sound of another pickup truck pulling into my driveway every Saturday morning around 8. Ethan's. His truck wasn't nearly as fancy as the SUV he'd traded in. That surprised me the first time I saw it. When he climbed out carrying a cardboard tray with 2 coffees, he caught me looking. What? You sold the SUV? He shrugged. Didn't need it. I thought you liked it. I liked what I thought it said about me. He handed me a coffee. Turns out it wasn't saying anything worth hearing. We sat on the porch in comfortable silence. That had always been one thing Ethan and I shared. We never felt obligated to fill every quiet moment with conversation. After a while, he nodded toward my toolbox. Porch still giving you trouble? The porch is fine. You sure? It just likes reminding people it's older than they are. He laughed. A real laugh. One I hadn't heard from him in years. Selling the big house had been Claire's idea. At first, Ethan resisted. He thought downsizing meant admitting failure. Claire saw it differently. It means we stop pretending. They found a smaller ranch house on the west side of Columbus. 3 bedrooms instead of 5. No formal dining room. No unnecessary mortgage. No country club nearby. Just a neighborhood where kids still rode bicycles until the streetlights came on. The first time I visited, Lily proudly gave me the grand tour. This is my room. I admired the glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling. This is Mommy's garden. It was 3 raised flower beds behind the garage. And Daddy mows the lawn now. I always mowed the lawn. Claire smiled from the patio. He means without complaining. Ethan raised both hands. I admit it. Everyone laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh. It was the kind families earn after surviving something together. Richard slowly disappeared from family gatherings. No one officially excluded him. There was no dramatic announcement. No angry group text. People simply stopped calling him first. Stopped assuming. Stopped confusing confidence with character. I heard through mutual friends that he was still selling commercial real estate. Still successful. Still polished. I honestly wished him well. Resentment is heavier than any furnace I ever carried. At 61, I wasn't interested in lifting unnecessary weight anymore. Melissa came by one afternoon carrying a pie she'd baked herself. Apple, always my favorite. She stood awkwardly on the porch until I invited her inside. I owe you something, she said. You don't owe me pie. She smiled sadly. No. She set the pie on the kitchen counter. I owe you an apology. I leaned against the sink. You don't have to. I do. Her eyes wandered around the room. I spent years believing the story that made my life easier. I didn't interrupt. I should have asked more questions. She swallowed. I should have defended you when Ethan compared you to Richard. I could have defended myself. That's not the point. She was right. It wasn't. After a long silence, I cut 2 slices of pie. We ate at the kitchen table where we'd once helped Ethan with algebra homework. Nobody tried to rewrite history. Some mistakes don't disappear. They simply become places where people choose to do better. A few weeks later, Ethan asked if I wanted to go fishing. Just the 2 of us. We drove to Hoover Reservoir before sunrise. The lake was smooth as glass. Steam drifted off the water. For nearly an hour, we focused on our fishing lines instead of each other. Eventually, Ethan cleared his throat. Dad, yeah. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. He stared across the water. Why didn't you ever tell me? I already knew what he meant. About the trust. He nodded. About any of it. I reeled my line in slowly before answering. When you were little, did you ever thank the furnace for keeping the house warm? He frowned. No. You just expected it to work. I guess. That's how I saw helping. He looked down. But I should have known. Maybe. I would have treated you differently. I smiled gently. I wasn't helping, so you'd treat me differently. The line between us went quiet again. A flock of geese crossed overhead. Finally, Ethan said, I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself. I shook my head. Don't waste your life trying to repay me. He looked over. Then what do I do? Take care of your family. I will. And when Lily grows up, he waited. Teach her that the people who love you the most aren't always the loudest people in the room. He nodded slowly. I will. A few days later, Lily came running across my yard carrying a school project. Grandpa, what have you got there? She held up a piece of construction paper covered in crayons. My teacher said we have to draw a hero. Oh, she turned it around. There was a little stick figure wearing a baseball cap beside an old pickup truck. The truck had 4 wheels that were much too big. I smiled. That's a nice truck. She giggled. I couldn't draw all the rust. I laughed harder than I had in a long time. Then she wrapped her little arms around my waist. Children don't care about trust funds, or mortgage statements, or who paid hospital bills. They remember who showed up, who listened, who made them feel safe. As I hugged my granddaughter, I realized something. Almost nothing in my life looked different than it had 6 months earlier. My knees still hurt. My truck still had well over 200,000 miles on it. The porch still creaked every morning. The coffee still tasted best outside, but one thing had changed. When Ethan hugged me goodbye now, I knew he was hugging his father. Not the man who quietly paid his bills, just his father, and somehow, that was worth more than every dollar I'd ever spent. Growing older has taught me that helping the people you love is a privilege, but allowing kindness to become an expectation can quietly damage even the strongest relationships. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let the truth speak for itself. If this story reminded you of someone in your own life or taught you something worth remembering, I'd be honored if you shared it in the comments. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I hope you take good care of yourself and the people you love.